Hello, everyone. I welcome you all to Illuminate, the Lumency webinar, which is a platform where tech professionals explore the latest innovation in emerging technologies. So I'm Karthik. I'm the head of the hardware technology group at Lumency. And I have with me Chris Hardy, who's the head of the software technology group at Lumency. So today we are going to talk about the emerging technologies that can empower the future of connected cars. Our session is going to consist of 30 minutes of our presentation, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A. So please feel free to drop your queries in the chat, and we will answer them towards the end. So with that said, let's get into a brief introduction about the speakers today. So let me start with an introduction about myself. So I'm the head of the hardware technology group at Lumency. And my technical background is electrical engineering, and my area of specialization is semiconductor, specifically integrated circuit chip manufacturing. I have with me Chris, so why don't you introduce yourself, Chris?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. So my background is in software. I have a computer science degree. I spent 15 years developing software and then kind of shifted to the IP space where I filed a lot of inventions at IBM, and then have kind of fully transitioned over into the litigation area of patents now for Lumency.
Thanks, Chris. So Chris is now going to get into the agenda for the webinar today. Over to you, Chris.
Right. So connected cars are basically one of the tech areas that's like a perfect blend of hardware and software coming together to both fields advancing fairly rapidly now, even though automotive industry is not really known for fast advancement in general. And so it's an exciting area for a lot of people in a lot of ways. We're also going to cover, what these things are, how they work. We're going to cover some case studies of current players. And then we're going to talk about the vehicles and the systems that they connect to, and what they'll be capable of is kind of hard to predict, a few years down the road. But we're going to talk about some use cases that seem like they're going to have obvious value. And, I think that you'll be able to extrapolate quite a bit from there. It's an exciting time. So finally, we'll look at some challenges that could slow the adoption of these technologies and things that kind of have slowed them a little bit, leading to now. Okay, so why connected cars? It's one of those things, most people have a car in the US, or, at least ride in them if they're taking Ubers everywhere. But the big thing is that, again, it's a kind of a slow moving industry in general, but lots of things have changed. Usually things like safety issues, dual stage airbags since 2000, between 2000 to 2022. We've really seen like dual stage airbags come into play, better occupant sensors for airbag deployment, like multi-stage, based on that, is very safe compared to where we were 20 years ago. Stability control, collision warnings, emergency braking that's automatic, parking assist. There's a lot of efficiencies too that have changed. The routing is vastly better than using MapQuest 20 years ago. The energy use is less in a lot of cases. They're just more efficient in general. And we've gotten a good start on autonomous control of these vehicles. And, I think that's what a lot of people are interested in, what a lot of people think of when they think about connected cars. So, the basics of connected cars, like, what is it? It's pretty straightforward, right? So it's basically any vehicle that can connect to the internet. But there are really three kind of main types of this. And they really deal with what they're connecting to. And so if you've got devices in the car, say your smartphone, you're probably going to be using Bluetooth. All right. If you're connecting to vehicles or other things that are nearby, you're going to use wireless LAN technologies. And typically, if you're going to use things that are further away, that's going to go over the cell network of some sort, LTE or 5G. And a lot of the standards are already based on either LTE or 5G now. And I think that that's kind of how we can break down the way the technology works and to the three categories there. And then you really have like two main systems moving forward. You've got embedded systems, where the car has everything kind of built into it already. And then you've got tethered systems where you've got hardware, maybe it's tethering to your smartphone and getting a lot of the intelligence for things through it. And so we're obviously moving towards embedded systems more and more, but as we try to integrate older vehicles into new technology, it's likely that we're going to have a lot of tethered systems in the future, at least for a while.
Thanks, Chris. So, now that we have a brief introduction about why we're talking about connected cars and what are the basics of connected cars, the next step here is trying to understand, the system that Chris just talked about. So, think about it from a designer's perspective. If you're trying to build a system, you got to first figure out what are the building blocks and how do you want to integrate them into a complete system. So what you're seeing here is like a minimalistic approach when you think about building a system for connected cars. Of course, you need a processor, which is what the central computational unit that you have in the system, which is the application processor. And on top of that, you need to have something that can perform the process of communications, like sending and receiving messages. So that is typically done by a modem. And then you also have something called as in-vehicle networking. For example, the CAN-MP transceivers is a very good example. So if you look at the transceivers that are present inside the connected car system, that could be a typical example for in-vehicle networking. And on top of that, often people ignore the fact that the power management chip is the most important thing in any system design, but it's one of the main things that is needed, especially in the context of connected cars, because as you can probably imagine, you're looking at a discrete thing that is moving around, which may or may not have access to continuous supply of power. So managing the power that is inside the whole system is critical. So power management, like power management integrated circuits, that could be one example. And on top of that, you also need a security element, because think of the amount of data that is coming in and out of your car, or it could be like going from your car to the city. So I would like Chris to talk more about the software perspectives that would be related to the security element.
Right. And so we're going to talk about the security element. We're going to touch on it briefly in a number of places in this, because it's, to me, one of the most important factors for people to be able to trust that this is the way they want to be, and have a car that can do all these things. When you've got an enormous amount of data, like telematics data and other data being pushed like out to the cloud or other providers through these network systems, that's scary enough. The collection of all that data. But when you can push controls back into the vehicle, which is where we're headed, that's an even scarier thing. So, a lot of people, their worst nightmare is the idea of being in a car and not having control over it, or being able to adjust it because some bad actor has taken control over it. So I think that one of the comfort levels for people will be around this security element and all of the stack of things that are built on top of it.
Right. So we will get back to these concepts once again when we get into the case studies, but just a heads up that, when you're trying to build a system, you got to think about these building blocks and then decide how we want to integrate them. Next, Chris is going to talk about the key features of connected vehicles.
Right. And so these are just some of the things that are kind of like in normal common thought around these areas right now. But, it's tip of the iceberg, because it's still kind of a young technology based on, there's not a lot of third-party integration. We're not very far along, but what we're really looking at is, app-to-car connectivity. We already have stages of this now where you can, connect your car through Android or iOS to a number of vehicles. Wi-Fi connectivity, again, it's just going to become more broadly available, where you can use your vehicle as a hotspot that's always with you when you're riding or driving. The geofencing, that area is very, very tip of the iceberg, because you can imagine all sorts of use cases where maybe you want to allow your teenager to have fairly free reign, get some freedom without allowing them to go anywhere and do anything. So you can certainly see it warning you if they go into certain areas or out of certain areas, or even possibly preventing it if in certain situations, say you're not in the car, then occupancy plus geofencing equals a lot of control in some of these things. Vehicle to vehicle communication is fascinating too, because the idea that you can share data with others, not just what they know about themselves, but what they know about their environment. And so very fascinating use cases around this. The concepts have been around for a while, but you know, a lot of people still haven't heard of the idea that you could, you know, see through objects, like see through a building, see through vehicles ahead of you, based on cameras in the other vehicles or you know, on the infrastructure around you that it's connecting to. And so it can basically take images and videos from other places and kind of construct, you know, on a heads-up display, basically so you can see through, oh, I can see traffic through this 18-wheeler in front of me, sort of thing. Just all sorts of very cool things. Navigation, of course, you know, is only going to get better. And, you know, you can certainly see some of the shared data helping with navigation where, you know, we kind of get that now based on smartphone things, but it'll get a lot better when you can actually have your car ask, you know, your neighbor's car, hey, can I get over in front of you? And, you know, it decided to reroute me, and the other car can respond and actually have that kind of negotiation sort of thing. Autonomous vehicle controls, again, a lot of people, that's what people think of when they're talking about connected vehicles to begin with, and what is driving a lot of this, I think. And then, you know, we talked about security, and extremely important impact on everything. And especially if we start to see a lot of like third-party things being implemented on these, which, you know, these cars are basically large cell phones with wheels, you know, smartphones, you know, from a software perspective, a lot of times they're just a little more complex, but, you know, we're going to start seeing a lot of proliferation of apps, I think. The idea of remote parking and control is fascinating, kind of goes along with that autonomous vehicle control idea. And then infotainment, certainly, again, a little bit better when you think about having an autonomous vehicle doing the driving, a little less important if you're the one doing the driving, but at least your passengers can benefit if it's still being driven by a person. So a lot of pieces here, but again, this is really tip of the iceberg of what's possible. And, you know, we don't even know what it's going to look like in a decade for sure.
Yeah, rightly said, Chris. So, you know, as you can imagine, it's going to be a combination of challenges that are coming both from the software side as well as the hardware side, and how you want to solve each one of those problems, either in a parallel fashion, or, you know, like you solve one problem first and then move on to the second one. That's again a different type of issue that designers have been facing around with respect to the connected vehicles. With that, let's move on to the next topic, which is what is V2X? Over to you, Chris.
Right. So, you know, when you see acronyms like this in technology, the X always means, well, not always, but it almost always means anything, right? It's basically a placeholder for some large list of other like acronym letters that can get stuck in there. And so when we have this list down at the bottom of 6 things, that's not exhaustive, right? There's already others that we probably could list, and who knows what it will look like, you know, again, a few years down the road. But what we're really talking about are these as kind of like the core things that are being thought about right now. Vehicle to vehicle, you know, this is talking about, you know, communicating speed, position, other data, like, you know, maybe even images, from the vehicles around you, and being able to negotiate, you know, talk to each other, you know, form convoys, you know, loosely coupled things that can benefit people for routing, energy savings, all sorts of things. There's no telling what that's going to look like, how great some solutions might be in a few years. Vehicle to device, this is back to that whole idea of, you know, either tethering or using a device and having some level of interaction between, you know, typically a smartphone and your car. And, you know, nowadays it's probably, if you've got a full car, it's probably 4 or 5 smartphones. And so there's a lot of things that can be built in into that to kind of help you get things done, especially, you know, in the age when we're eventually not having to pay as much attention to the road. Vehicle to pedestrian is a lot like vehicle to vehicle. You know, the pedestrian devices like their smartphones can report where they are to you, and you can report to them as well. And so there's like a huge safety benefit to the pedestrian and that sort of scenario. And if you, you know, you're gonna have to use other sensors too, but the idea that you could like warn people or have a level of control with this communication is a very good positive. One of the really important pieces is this vehicle to infrastructure. And so the idea that, you know, you can have, you know, communication with the vehicles around you is great. But if you're talking about how to figure out, you know, how to time lights, or how to, maybe routing in general, a lot of this information is going to come from the infrastructure, the roadway infrastructure, things about, what's going on in intersections, where work zones are, curve warnings. A lot of this we have on things like Waze now, but most of it is, not automatic. When these are more generally picked up by vehicles and infrastructure and reported to each other, it's going to become a much safer situation. And safety is really one of the features of this whole concept. And then V2N, this is really just the connection to the network, and the billions of other devices that are out there. Some of them on the cloud, some of them nearby. It really just kind of covers this idea that you have this connectivity and basically you can connect to anything. And then finally, V2G. So this is the idea of connecting to the grid. And so you can optimize charging, like say you're at home or away from home, you can optimize charging on your vehicle. And not only that, you can actually use these to kind of like act as a battery and push energy back into the grid to kind of like flatten out demand if necessary. So, most people are familiar with like the Powerwall and other devices that are basically in-home batteries. Your car can't act like that. And so if there's a connection between it and the house or the grid, and there's this level of intelligence, then I think that it's going to make a lot of interesting things possible related to that.
Yeah, agreed.
Again, all of it sits on this like fascinating, complex level of hardware, and then it just really enables us to make all sorts of stacks and APIs on top of that to enable all these things.
Right. So just to recap what we have covered so far, we started with an introduction to this topic of connected cars. And then we got into the basics of connected cars, where we talked about, what are the types, what are the systems that are there. And then we got into the idea of like, what are the features and benefits coming out. And then lastly, we talked about, like what is, the V2X. So now that we have like a good understanding of, the basics of this connected cars topic, the next part of the webinar, we are going to switch gears and get into some specific case studies. The way we are going to cover this is we'll talk about from the auto manufacturer sides, what's going on, and then from the component manufacturers, we're talking about the semiconductor chip manufacturers that provide these functionalities into the connected cars. So that's the next part of our webinar. So here we are starting with our first case study, which is Qualcomm. I'm pretty sure many of you would be very familiar with Qualcomm's product portfolio. But for this webinar, we are going to talk about like 3 specific product features. The first one is what we call as the CV2X platform. This is actually related to the topic that we just talked about. What is V2X? So what type of hardware component coming from Qualcomm is getting us this functionality? There is a specific component called system on chip, or SoC, that is inside the so-called connected cars, which gives out this specific V2X functionality to any car. So with respect to Qualcomm, we are looking at one example here. Of course, there are plenty. Qualcomm 9150, that's a chipset with 40 nanometer process technology node. For those of you who are not familiar with the process technology node, it talks about different generations of integrated circuits. And then we are talking about how the chips are getting smaller. So we use a parameter which is called in terms of nanometers. But of course, these days we are also talking about angstrom, which is like 1 order less than a nanometer. So things will keep on getting smaller and smaller. That's the central idea here with respect to the chip design. One thing to keep in mind, and when we discuss about Qualcomm, is like, why are they the leaders in this specific arena? My view is that Qualcomm is actually taking the lead when compared to any other companies, let's say Samsung or LG or Huawei, who are all trying to have like a fierce competition in this space. But Qualcomm's unique strategy is that they are trying to be ahead of the process technology node when it comes to like 40 nanometer design, or 7 nanometer design, or 5 nanometer, which is the most recent one. So when a company is trying to beat their competitors, their strategy would be more like, I want to give you the chip that is actually having like more number of transistors, which are the building blocks of a chip. So they pack more so that you get better functionality out of it. So that's the design principle that's allowing Qualcomm to be the leader here. The second example that you see here is the automotive cockpit platform, which, as you can see, there are 2 different generations. One is the 7 nanometer one and the 5 nanometer one. So the 5 nanometer one, if I remember correctly, it was launched back in like 2021, and then the 7 nanometer somewhere around like 2017. So these two chips are primarily responsible for improving the user experience that you get when you are looking at the cockpit of your car, whether you are driving a Toyota or Lexus, whatever brand that you have. The idea here is Qualcomm's chipset, which is behind the scene, is getting you the unique user and immersive experience that you're getting from your car. So that's the second aspect. The third aspect is the Snapdragon digital chassis. Qualcomm has plenty of information available on their website, which gives you more info about each of these six functionalities that we are talking about here. Each one of them is basically representing a specific type of product portfolio that they are designing, so that it has like a focused attention. Like it could be focusing on the ride, it could be focusing on the connectivity, or it could be focusing on the cockpit, and three more. So I will have Chris talk more about the software perspective behind what Snapdragon digital chassis is actually doing for Qualcomm.
Right. So like Karthik said, one thing that sets these guys apart is their idea of having this stack on top of it that's accessible to automakers, that will have a lot of easily built functionality on top of it. And so the car to cloud stuff, think of it as like over the air updates, for your software. You can get new features added to your car, like through this sort of connection to the cloud. And in the case of Tesla recently, they can push out code to fix a recall that was necessary in a very easy way. It enables subscription services, which are a little controversial, kind of known as car as a service, where you can like pay BMW, $9 a month or something for your seat warmers to work if you didn't buy that, when you got the car. So not all of these are things that people are super excited about, but some of them are really interesting. And the idea that you can buy a car and then a year later get some great new feature kind of just added is pretty cool. And it also allows personalization. You can have all sorts of data on the cloud, so that even if you rent a car, maybe it pushes down your profile and things about the car act, maybe it's got your radio stations, maybe it's got your, other things that are specific to you on it temporarily, which was kind of a neat way to personalize things. And then finally, it allows the gathering of analytics, and there's an immense amount of data being collected already, and it's only going to grow like by leaps and bounds as we get more and more vehicles out there and better sensors. It's going to be a ton of things being sent out to the cloud through that. CV2X, he's already touched on some. It's really that's just their way for connecting to everything, around them. It's a kind of a necessary part of it, that sits underneath a lot of this, kind of in between some of the low-level hardware and the software. And then you've really got positioning solutions. And again, this is like not news to people that we can do some of these things, but when you get very precise, like high performance positioning technologies, you can do all sorts of things that are better navigation, emergency control, advanced driver assistance systems, and autonomous driving. It's really hard to have that without good positioning systems. And so they're really kind of thought about this early enough to get this stuff developed before it was necessary for the industry. And I think that it sets them apart from a lot of leaders in this area. To me, I kind of think of it like NVIDIA does the same thing for like virtual worlds and video cards, right? It's not just the video card, it's the stack. And here it's Qualcomm, making sure that they've got a good way to position themselves in this.
Yep. That's how they are leading the space. Again, for the purpose of this webinar, we are also going to talk about another semiconductor chip manufacturer, which I'm assuming many of you would be already familiar. It's called NXP Semiconductors. Here, what we are trying to accomplish here is, we already showed how someone would think about building a connected car system, where we talked about different building blocks and how to build them all together so that you get a complete system. So as you can see in this block diagram, which is representation of NXP's concept behind the connected car system, you can easily spot some of the some of the components that we already talked about. For example, the modem, which we talked about, that's the SAF5400. And then you can also see the application processor, which is the IMX8X Lite. And on top of that, you can also see the transceivers, which is the in-vehicle networking that we talked about. And the secure element is the SXF1800. And then you can also see the power management chip like the PF7100 in this example. So here, what you're basically looking at is like a dual antenna and dual channel connected car system. And you're looking at individual components or blocks that are together getting you this so-called connected car system in NXP's specific design. The key thing that I would like to highlight here is if you look at the SAF5400, you can already notice that, there is mention of, 802.11p and then 1609.4. So all of these are standards. So keep in mind that when you are a chip manufacturer, you got to design the chips that are compatible with a specific set of procedures or process that are set by the governing body. In this case, it's going to be either IEEE or ETSI or 3GPP, like depending upon which type of standards you're talking about. So it is important from the chip manufacturer's perspective to have a chip that is in compliance with the specific standards. So that's pretty much what I wanted to emphasize from this block diagram. Maybe Chris, do you have anything to add on the secure element?
Yeah, so that SXF 1800. Again, I know I'm going to kind of harp on this, but security is kind of a big deal, and everybody should be concerned about it for these large rolling death traps in some ways. This chip provides like standards-based data encryption, private key management. So you can create keys, remove keys, use keys, signature generation, all things that are necessary to kind of lock down communications with things outside the vehicle. And so it's not going to solve every single problem by itself, because there's many layers of things that can be attacked. But having something importantly like a vault at the bottom that's this secure is very important to start with.
Yeah, I agree. So now that we have looked at Qualcomm and NXP as two examples of semiconductor chip manufacturers, we are going to switch gears and then look at the last case study. In this case, we are going to talk about the auto manufacturers. Over to you, Chris.
Oh, sure. So we've had some level of cabin awareness for a while. You sometimes get a warning. Oh yeah, the seatbelt's off, or the airbag's off over on this side, or the airbag's on this side. Or you check the back seat, you might have left your bag. But as we get more precise cabin awareness and some of these telematics that can be analyzed, not only can you know what's happening in the back row of your van when your kids are acting up, but an important factor is safety in the future. And so we're going to be collecting so much data about even the most minuscule, like at some point you'll be able to tell who was facing forward when this accident happened versus who was like turned around a little bit, or the exact weights of the people and heights and things like that, and we can start to use that data eventually. As data science is getting enormous right now, it won't be that hard to use some of this to increase safety protocols and better designs for things that are going to improve things for all of us, even if we don't have this technology ourselves. And then for the BMW, on-street parking, like automatic parking, this is more about locating, but of course we can foresee what's going to happen where we've got autonomous vehicles where you can basically say, okay, you drop me off here, and then it goes and finds a parking space that's open, that it already knows is open, so it doesn't have to circle the block 100 times. And so it finds a space, maybe even reserves it depending on how advanced these systems are, and then carries on. Super convenient. It's almost like car as a service in that way, where it just kind of is there when you need it, and it'll come back and get you when you're ready. These are just two of 1,000 use cases that we're going to benefit from when these things take off.
That's right. So, for the purpose of this webinar, we're just giving you just like the tip of the iceberg here. As you can see, in any auto manufacturer's design principle, they have to think about both, integrating the software with, like hardware component, let's say, for example, in this case, camera, sensors, whatever it takes to build this whole system. So we're talking about, designing both the hardware side as well as the software side, and more importantly, integrating the two to get the better experience that you would have. So that is actually the end of the case studies. Now we're going to switch gears and then briefly understand, we talked about some of these specific buckets within the space of connected cars. Like, for example, we talked about the vehicular communication system so far, and then we also briefly touched upon, navigation system. And Chris also mentioned about, telematics when we started the webinar. So as you can see, there are some specific companies that are actually trying to lead within like the specific umbrella of connected cars. So for example, on the cloud services, you might be able to see a lot of familiar names like Amazon, Microsoft, even IBM. All of them are like well known in the field of the cloud computing space, but they are the ones who are trying to capture the space that is actually relevant to their business, but at the same time, the amount of data that you're getting from each of these connected cars is going to be of great value. I mean, I can't imagine how many papers have been published which talks about the monetization of data that is coming out of these cars, so that it actually gives a lot of advantage for these type of companies. And in addition, you can also see like navigation systems. You can see like Google, that's everybody is familiar with. And on the telematics, you could also see Autonomo. I would definitely recommend you to check out Autonomo. I understand, like for those of you who are not super familiar with telematics, we're talking about solving the supply chain problem. Like, you're trying to understand how you want to send a fleet of trucks so that somebody like a retailer is making sure the lead time is less or the safety stock is met. Anything that has to do with supply chain management, that's actually going to help these type of companies. And on this slide, I'm sure many of these names are already familiar to you. And as you can see here, different companies take different strategies because they want to make sure their central business strategy is aligned with the specific areas within connected cars. And based on that, they spend money on R&D and then try to be the leaders in this space. So that's just an example of how the landscape looks like. Now, the last part of the presentation, we're going to talk about what are the future opportunities that are coming up. Over to you, Chris.
Right. And so again, it really does feel like tip of the iceberg for a lot of this stuff because there's so many possibilities. But the idea that you can upgrade your software, have bug fixes, get new features, add new services to the vehicle, any of the over the air things that are coming directly from either the automaker themselves, which is like your typical use case right now, or as we get more into this third party stack, and APIs and things that sit on top, it'll be a much more complex ecosystem, more like a cell phone is now than just a car that's got one set of software on it. And so that's kind of a big piece.
Right. And also, if we look at, for example, edge computing, one thing that I would imagine happening is you want to make a trade-off, like how much computation you want to do on the edge versus how much you want to do on the cloud. Or do you want to do like half here and half there? That's going to be another complexity in the design challenges that I can see here, because you can rely everything on the cloud side, but that's also having some problems. But you can rely everything on the edge side, but that's also going to cause some problems. It depends upon the reliability of the components, and then like how much amount of the data communication that is happening between the cloud and the edge. So all those things are actually like problems that we are anticipating, so that it actually is motivating the engineers to solve these problems, which we would anticipate in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's the central theme here. And also, like the user experience, it's going to be tremendously high, because as we build more cars, more consumers are going to ask for more. They're going to say like, no, I'm not happy with what I have. I need something more. So this type of consumer demand is going to keep on increasing in the upcoming years. And that's actually going to trigger more emerging technologies that are related to connected cars. So with that said, we're going to switch gears and then come to the last aspect, which is the future challenges for connected cars. Over to you, Chris.
Right. And so we've talked on some of these already a little bit. Again, I'm harping on it somewhat, but the privacy and security aspect can't be overstated. The fact that there's already a book like this available on Amazon I'm not saying it's a warning. I'm just saying that, people have been thinking about it for a while. You better believe that, bad actors have also been preparing and trying to figure out what they can do. And so they need to, for people to feel comfortable with this, they're going to have to get some level of trust with it. And so this is important. At some point we're going to hear a story about something that got hacked, whether data was extracted or something was controlled, and, hopefully it's a minimal thing and they can figure out how to prevent that.
Yeah, and in addition, we already touched upon the standards compliance in our in the previous slides, but I want to again emphasize that it's not just about compliance with standards, it's also about compliance with the regulations that are set by the government. For example, the US Department of Transportation, they would have a specific set of regulations that you want to obey, whether you are designing a car, a truck, you want to make sure you're doing something safe to the public. So that's again a regulation-wise problem that I'm seeing in this specific arena, because safety is more important than anything. So the Department of Transportation is going to set up a lot of regulations, which both the auto manufacturers as well as the chip manufacturers would need to think a lot and make sure that they're not just focusing on the comfort side, but they're also making sure there is a combination of both comfort as well as safety. So that's again a challenge that I'm anticipating in the field of connected cars. So having said that, we have looked at like a flavor of what this connected cars topic is, and then what type of opportunities and challenges are coming in. So that actually brings us to the end of the webinar. But before we wrap up, I want to emphasize that we have a full service technology consulting firm that is ready for you to solve any problems that can happen, either it is in the software side or the hardware side or the telecom side. We have a dedicated team of in-house experts who can actually help you solve any type of problem. So in case if you're curious to know about what is this company doing, or what type of market research is going on, please feel free to reach out to us. We are always available. So that actually brings us to the end of this webinar, and the floor is open for question and answers now. So if you have any questions, please throw them on the chat. Can you see any questions?
No.
So maybe while we are waiting, I'll ask you one question. What do you think Lumency can do when it comes to understanding a specific chipset that is inside like let's say a connected car module that we have, let's say in Toyota or Lexus? I do have some thoughts, but I'm curious what your thinking is behind to investigate this problem.
Yeah, I mean, I guess before you go to low level, you start high level and look at the documentation, and then the building blocks are important, but before you start tearing things down, looking at the communication that's going in and out of it, you can probably tap into that and get information that's going back and forth, and figure out kind of what's being done, how it's being done a little bit. And then of course you can always do a full tear down and get into the lab, use specialized equipment to kind of tear it apart and figure out exactly what makes these things work. The abilities of reverse engineering now are pretty amazing. So I think that at some point, to know what it's doing, you have to go all the way down to that level. But you can probably figure out all except for that like last 20% but before you do that, that's the hard part, right?
Yeah, and again, I want to tell everyone that at Lumency we have what is called a tear down as a service. So in case if you're interested in learning more about what is this box that I'm looking at is having inside, please do reach out to us, because we can help you with understanding what type of printed circuit boards or the chips, looking at the die markers are inside. So it will be tremendously helpful either from the competitive intelligence perspective, or if you're thinking like if you want some due diligence done on a specific manufacturer, we are more than happy to help you with that. So I see one question here, Chris. It's for you. So what are the biggest challenges for autonomous vehicle adoption?
Right. So, and we have to make sure we're distinguishing, not all connected cars are autonomous, right? And I think that we could probably assume that all autonomous vehicles are connected. But I think that I see a number of challenges, right? So safety is huge, because every time somebody hears about an autonomous vehicle doing something dangerous or somebody getting injured or more serious than that, that is going to be a delay in adoption because people are going to worry about it. Two, it's cost, because I think that if you're having to add 5 figures onto the price of your car every time you want to add one of these systems, or if you have to pay a decent monthly on top of your normal car payment, I think that it's going to obviously take a while to get off the ground in a mass way. 3, regulations. I think that the car industry is, like I said, is typically historically slow moving, and one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons is that regulations are slow to change, and they're different. Like, we don't have federal regulations for everything. Some of them are state by state, and even when we get federal ones, it takes a while. But I think that the biggest challenge is probably, Elon Musk had a famous quote recently about it, and he said it in a weird way, but the net is that for a very long time, we're going to have autonomous vehicles on the road with normal drivers, and the integration is the challenge, right? And these cars are probably already at like average driver skill, like, and maybe better than the average driver, but that's a low bar, and we all know that. And so I think that it being able to deal with unexpected situations is the thing. If every vehicle were autonomous on the road, then it's going to be easy. That's a much easier problem to solve. So I think that those are the biggest issues I see.
Those are all great insights. So I want to say that, in case if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to either Chris or I. You can see our email address on the slide that we are showing here. So I want to say thank you to everyone for taking time to attend this webinar. I hope this was helpful, and I wish you all good luck with whatever endeavors that you have on connected cars, or if you're just curious about this topic as a driver. That's also great. So again, a big thank you to everyone.
Thank you.